If we have Amy's heart, we can save Hannah. Agree to organ donation and push Amy down the stairs or hit her. If you need help, I will do it. In any case, give Amy's heart to Hannah. My husband asked me, make your own daughter almost die to offer her heart for my niece. Facing my husband's outrageous demand, I felt like I was going insane. David, my husband, and I have been married for about 5 years. Our daughter Amy was born 1 year after we got married. From the time I was pregnant, David seemed to have no interest in our unborn child. When I told him about my pregnancy, his response was an indifferent, "Oh, is that so?" Perhaps it was due to the hormonal imbalance caused by pregnancy, but I remember shouting at David, "Why aren't you happy?" And we ended up in a fight. I don't think David hates children. After all, when my sister Sarah gave birth to her daughter Hannah, David, who was my boyfriend at the time, was so moved that he held the newborn Hannah and cried. "Babies are so small," he said through his tears. The look in his eyes as he touched Hannah's soft cheek was full of love. And yet, for some reason, David seemed to dislike Amy, his own daughter, even before she was born. When we found out the gender and I told him, "It looks like it's a girl," all he said was, "Oh." When I asked him if he would attend the birth, he immediately replied, "No." Even if he didn't hate children, I thought that he might be afraid of becoming a father, and I tried to forcibly accept his terrible attitude. Then Amy was born safely. She was so lovely at the first sight, and her tiny hand grasping my finger was too adorable. But David had no interest in Amy. When Sarah came to see the baby with Hannah, who was 2 years older than Amy, David was only fond of Hannah. There was always this question. Why? Why wouldn't David ever hold Amy? Why did David always look annoyed when Amy came to him? When I confronted him with these questions, he always answered irritably, "I'm busy with work. I can't afford to spend time on the child." David had a strong ambition to rise, and he seemed to be eager to get promoted as soon as possible. He actively took on work, and there were days when he would be holed up in his room at home, writing business proposals. Perhaps work was the most important thing to David. Still, I had always wished for him to consider his family first. I might be selfish, but I had always wanted him to watch Amy grow up with me. Amy started going to kindergarten and playing with her friends, lively every day. I felt like I had been raising her all by myself, but I made some mom friends and my loneliness was somewhat relieved. When I consulted my mom friends about David, one of them, a straightforward and big sisterly woman, bluntly suggested, "Why don't you get divorced?" Raising a child should be a joint effort between husband and wife. Being busy at work is no excuse at all. And isn't Amy 4 years old? I'm surprised you've put up with this for so long. There are also kids who get hurt more when their parents get divorced as they grow older, so if you're going to make a decision, sooner is better. I might be sticking my nose in your business, but... What she said was very reasonable, and I'd been considering divorce myself. But I couldn't make up my mind, constantly worrying about whether I could raise Amy on my own, or whether it was okay to arbitrarily take away Amy's father from her, even though he was such a bad father. So her words were not unwelcome at all, but rather a relief, giving me a strong push in the back. I decided to discuss divorce with David. The night I made the decision, after Amy fell asleep, David came to me and asked me to give Amy's heart to our niece Hannah. David had researched organ donation, and it seemed possible for a child to receive a transplant with parental consent. I had only just found out from David, not Hannah's mother Sarah, that Hannah was suffering from a severe heart condition and could not live much longer. "We need to get Amy's heart to Hannah as soon as possible," David said, agitated. "I need a moment," I protested, my voice sounding more like a scream. "What's going on? I feel sorry for Hannah, but why does David know about this?" "Because Hannah is my child." I was so shocked, I couldn't speak. I felt sick. Despite David being right in front of me, leaning on the dining table and holding his head, I couldn't feel him close. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. David, unable to hide his irritation, started explaining his desperate situation. It seemed like David had a crush on Sarah, who was a year younger than me, for a long time. He had once proposed to her, but Sarah chose Kyle, the man she is now married to. Sarah had a reputation for being flirtatious, but it seems she had restrained herself since meeting Kyle. However, she had apparently been secretly meeting with David quite often. David said Sarah chose Kyle, not him, because Kyle was a civil servant. David earned less than the average salaried worker. His salary would hardly increase unless he got promoted. David's strong ambition was to get promoted quickly and take Sarah away from Kyle. Sarah is raising Hannah as Kyle's child, but she promised that if I got promoted and started earning more, she will definitely leave Kyle and come live with me and Hannah. Then why did you marry me? By marrying you, I can stay close to Sarah and naturally have more opportunities to see Hannah. You married me for such a reason? I love David, but he never really saw me. The fact made me miserable and frustrated. To my despair, David added fuel to the fire. Amy isn't my child, is she? Amy doesn't look like me at all. She must be the child of some unknown man. Hannah's life is far more important than Amy's. Amy's heart should be given to Hannah. I felt as if something inside me had snapped. I'm not sure whether it was my love for David or my patience that snapped. Anyway, the man in front of me looked like some horrible monster. I swear I haven't cheated. Don't lump me together with people like you. Amy is definitely our child, but you're right. Amy doesn't resemble you. She is not a ruthless, unreasonable person like you. She's very kind. David glared at me angrily, but I was no longer afraid. As a mother, I am determined to protect Amy at all costs. I thought it would be dangerous to stay in this house with Amy, so I decided to leave immediately. I woke Amy up, carrying only the bare essentials so as to not alert David, who had started working on the project report he needed for his promotion to be with Sarah. Amy, half asleep, asked, "What's going on?" I hugged her tightly and whispered, "Amy, we're saying goodbye to Dad. We're going to Grandpa and Grandma's house. You won't be able to see your kindergarten friends anymore, but can you bear with it?" My desperate voice must have conveyed something to Amy. She nodded in agreement, her voice filled with tension. Holding Amy, I quietly left the house and ran towards the station. I considered taking the car, but thought it would be troublesome if David asked for it back. Once we got to the train, Amy, tired, fell asleep, but we managed to reach the vicinity of my parents' home close to the last train time. I ignored the numerous calls and messages from David, who must have noticed our absence and pressed the intercom at my parents' house. My parents, still awake, were surprised. What happened? But I asked to put Amy to bed first. After laying Amy to sleep on the second floor, I explained the situation to my parents. I confessed my intention to break up with David. They were shocked by David's cruelty and despaired to know that Sarah was raising her child with David as Kyle's child. No parent would be happy knowing their child is engaged in cuckolding. Knowing that Amy's life was in danger, they allowed Amy and me to live in their home. The next day, unable to sleep, we greeted the morning. Amy seemed to not fully grasp the situation, but she was extremely happy to see her grandparents. As I watched my parents lovingly observing Amy, I remembered the words a friend had told me. "You should divorce him as soon as possible," she had said. And I think she was right. It was possible that David had been planning to harm Amy without even consulting me. The thought sent chills down my spine. I ignored all of David's messages and texted him, "I will be seeking a divorce through lawyers. You are never to see Amy again." Shortly afterwards, I received a phone call from David's parents. "What is going on? David just contacted us abruptly saying that you two are divorcing. Is it true that your affair is the cause and Amy isn't related by blood to David?" In order to counteract David's attempts to get his parents on his side and reclaim Amy, I disclosed everything to his parents. Their disbelief was evident, so I invited them to my parents' house that day since my parents had said they would invite Sarah and Kyle over that evening to discuss things. David's parents lived relatively nearby. They agreed to come over. That evening, while my mother took care of Amy, I was in the living room with Sarah, Kyle, my father, and David's parents. It seemed that Hannah was still hospitalized. Sarah looked uncomfortable, while Kyle wore an angry expression. I had previously told Kyle over the phone about the events that had occurred the previous day and what David had said. He was probably unable to hide his anger towards Sarah. So Hannah really isn't my daughter, is she? It's true that David was planning to take Amy's heart to save Hannah, isn't it? Sarah, who had been biting her lip, burst into tears under Kyle's questioning. Yes, but Sarah's ugliness as she yelled was beyond description. Although there were my father and I, Sarah started talking like a tragic heroine. I wanted to help Hannah. That's why I asked David for Amy's heart. As a mother, it's natural, isn't it? How can you not understand the feeling of wanting to protect your own child? Is it because Kyle and Hannah aren't connected by blood you can't understand? Despite exposing her own infidelity, Sarah was crying like a victim, and Kyle sighed deeply. His clenched fist was shaking, and I was worried that he might hit Sarah at any moment, but Kyle seemed to be making an effort to speak rationally. I've always believed and raised Hannah as my true daughter. I was confused when I was told that Hannah is Sarah and David's child, but my feelings of caring for Hannah haven't changed. If I could cure Hannah's disease, I'd do anything. Then taking Amy's heart is no big deal. To go as far as taking the life of your niece to save Hannah, you and David are abnormal. Sarah, who was yelled at by Kyle, started crying loudly. I am so sorry. It was heartbreaking to see my father apologize deeply to Kyle. David's parents, who were listening in disbelief until now, also deeply apologized to Kyle and me alongside my father. Our foolish son, we are truly sorry. My father-in-law's voice was trembling as he apologized, and I could feel the enormity of the crime Sarah and David committed. Since the meeting was held to confirm the facts, once Sarah admitted her affair, the purpose of the meeting was achieved. As Kyle said, "I'll divorce Sarah," and stood up, Sarah shouted, "Wait, how am I supposed to live now? Who's going to pay for Hannah's treatment?" Almost at the same time as the sound of a car entering the garage. David wasn't invited to this meeting. I thought it would be scary if something happened to Amy. But David must have known that the only place I could go was my parents' house. David, who intruded into our house, seemed to realize that all of his wrongdoings had been revealed when he saw his parents apologizing to me and Kyle, and Sarah clinging to Kyle and crying. His face, which was red with anger, turned pale instantly, and even in that situation, he asked, "Where's Amy?" So I stood up and slapped his cheek. "Hannah is innocent. I feel sorry for her because she got sick, but I will never forgive you for trying to harm Amy." David, who was holding his slapped cheek, seemed to be surprised by my anger. I thought I was a quiet person. I didn't know such emotions were sleeping inside me. In the heat of my rising anger, I lunged at David. "You're the only one who's cuckolded. Amy is undoubtedly our child. You and Sarah are the ones who are messed up for doing the lowest things as humans. Don't think everyone's as messed up as you." Thanks to my father telling me to stop in the face of my raging self, I was able to regain some composure. David, who had been yelled at by me, looked at Sarah with a bewildered expression. Sarah, who had been clinging to Kyle's waist, was shaken off by Kyle. "David, I'm divorcing Sarah. If you want to marry her, go ahead. But I won't ever give you Hannah. I won't hand her over to fiends like you." Kyle's harsh, low voice, as if uttering a curse, seemed to freeze both Sarah and David in fear. Subsequently, Sarah and David were driven out of their homes and were disowned by their parents. Through the lawyers, Kyle divorced Sarah and successfully won custody of Hannah. Apparently, Sarah was often out, and most of the caregiving was done by Kyle, who took a long leave from work. I also divorced David through a lawyer. David sent a spiteful text saying, "Now I can marry Sarah." But Sarah and David didn't get married. Their parents severed ties with Sarah, but afterwards, Sarah had a mental breakdown and had to be hospitalized. Even though Sarah had been unfaithful, it seemed she cared about Hannah. Not being able to see Hannah broke Sarah's spirit. Kyle scoffed at her, saying she used to complain about how troublesome taking care of her was, though, and I felt the same way. Amy and I are living peacefully at my parents' home. At her new daycare, Amy seems to have made new friends, and she's growing up healthy and lively. I still keep in touch with Kyle. According to him, Hannah is due to have a heart transplant operation. When Amy and I went to visit Hannah, she gave us a cute smile and said to Amy, "Once the surgery is over, let's play a lot together." Both Kyle and I have been through tough times, but we've now resolved to raise our children responsibly as parents. As two single parents, we promised to support each other. I smiled, imagining the future of Hannah playing with Amy.